What is happening, people? Welcome to Scarfey Spurs Talk. It's a big moment for the podcast. Today, I'm absolutely delighted to be having what is a transfer interview exclusive with not long of the window left to do. Tottenham still plenty to do, I hope anyway, particularly in terms of incomings, but also outgoings before the end of the month when the transfer window slams shut. So I am honestly delighted to be joined by Sam Tabuteau, who's a sports reporter at the Standard Sport, covering Tottenham, Brentford, Fulham, West Ham, and Crystal Palace. Sam, real pleasure to have you here on Scarfey Spurs Talk. How you doing, firstly?
Yeah, good. Thanks for having me on. Busy time at the moment. Obviously, transfer window it's really heating up post World Cup, and I can imagine Tottenham are going to be involved in that in some way for sure.
Absolutely, certainly looks that way. Sam, thank you. Real pleasure to have you on. And to anybody listening, thank you very much. It'll be your first time putting your trust in us or coming back once again. A real sign of the growth of Scarfey Spurs this summer. To be able to have someone like Sam on is absolutely incredible. And that's thanks to the viewers and listeners for your incredible support on what has been a really good transfer window today, I'd argue, for Spurs. Sam, to start with, you cover 5 London clubs. So, I listed them there. Tottenham, Brentford, Fulham, West Ham and Palace. Sorry to do this to you, but is there a favourite that you have to cover?
Well, let's put it this way. Who are the two that keep me the most busy? That's probably Tottenham and West Ham, I'd say. So if we're looking for an easy day's work, I reckon Fulham and Brentford. They're nice clubs. They're nice clubs to cover, and not a ton of politics involved in the reporting there. It's all quite straight down the line, which makes my job a lot easier. Whereas, sure you can imagine Tottenham last season, it was all over the place.
I bet it was. Was there a genuine fear that you could be covering Tottenham in the Championship? Did you feel any of that kind of fan stress, emotion, particularly towards the end of the season? Because Tottenham stayed up literally by skin of their teeth the last day and probably the last kick as well. It felt like anyway. Did you feel any of that with the fans?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I spoke to fans, went to the protests, obviously went to when they lined the streets, which was fantastic on the final day against Everton. And yeah, in terms of, my job and how that was going to look going forward, there were very real conversations about what our strategy would be for, how we were going to cover Tottenham if they were in the Championship. So yeah, those are very real conversations. And the Spurs press pack, the media is full of Spurs fans, so that it was written with worry, some of them.
I think it was just shockwaves, wouldn't it, through a lot of places and a lot of areas if Tottenham have gone to the Championship. Sam, out of interest, which fan base, I'm thinking on social media particularly, give you the easiest time? Because I imagine, even though you do some fantastic work, you know what people are like, particularly on social media, hiding behind a platform and having their say. So I was wondering that, if one's slightly kinder or two are slightly kinder than the other, maybe.
Yeah, again, I'd have to say, I think this is based off of where I've come from and where I sort of started out in my career in journalism is Brentford and Fulham have always been kind to me. Brentford, I sort of covered them under Thomas Frank week in, week out. I was at every press conference, every game, women's team, youth team, charity work. I was sort of across the board with everything with Brentford. So yeah, really nice relationship with everyone involved there. And I think from the outside, you can see that as well. They're just a family club, and it's just a very community-driven sort of fan base. And so, it's not to make out like I'm a local celebrity, but if I walked into a community event at Brentford, there would be some people who'd, come up to me and sort of thank me for my work. And I think that's quite...
that's nice.
That's quite, it's nice, it's rewarding. And I never sort of forget the opportunities that they handed me, certainly at the start of my career.
Oh, that's lovely to hear. And it's funny you say that because as an outsider, of course, not supporting either of those clubs, that's the feeling you do get. As when you say both those clubs, you do think family feel, about community, a little bit more what football used to be, is maybe moving away from. Out of the five clubs then on your patch, which do you feel you know the best? You said there in terms of ones that have been kinder to you, etc. And we've talked about preferences, but yeah, is there one that you feel you know best than the other? Because you are very knowledgeable. You can tell from throughout your work that you know a lot about all five. But is there one that you go actually like maybe a bit of pub quiz or something? You go, do you know what? I back myself even more on that club with the questions about.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think Tottenham is probably up there because last season that was again week in week out. It was the press conferences, it was the games, it was everything in between that, and it was it's quite all encompassing. So I think in terms of knowledge, it would certainly be up there. And then again, also I'm drawing on a lot of sort of previous experience covering Brentford, so that sort of helps when you have that retrospective knowledge. You can go back into the depths of your mind and pull something from 2-3 years ago, which adds context to what you're reporting on now. So yeah, I think probably Brentford and Tottenham.
Okay, great stuff, Sam. Thank you very much. Don't worry, I'm not going to quiz you for now anyway. But on a more serious note, for anyone that doesn't know what your job involves, I try and look a little bit because it's something that really interests me and that I want to get into. But for those that maybe have no idea at all, what does your typical day look like? For example, if you use Tottenham, what does your typical day look like covering Tottenham?
Yeah, so I'll try and go for a slightly more interesting day because at the moment I'm kind of cooped up inside, calling people, emailing people, trying to just get a scoop on stories basically, which it isn't. It's intense and it's quite rewarding when you do end up getting something, but it's not particularly exciting in that regard. But week to week, when the action's on and the Premier League's underway, for example, I'd probably be at a press conference Thursday or Friday. I'd be at the game Saturday or Sunday. I would, you talk to De Zerbi, you write up everything that he talks about, you preview the game going forward, and then when you get to the game itself, you're obviously analysing the game, you're analysing all the stories outside of that, say there's a fan protest or a player comes off injured, as happens an awful lot last season. I mean, those are separate stories in themselves, and supporters are very interested. I wouldn't say they love those stories, but they're certainly very interested in them. So those are the sort of things you got to keep your eye on, of course. But yeah, it's especially covering five clubs. It's very relentless. That could sometimes ramp up to sort of 2 to 3 games a week, 2 to 3 press conferences a week, and then suddenly, you're non-stop. Really, you don't have time to think. But I absolutely love it, and it's something I've always wanted to do. So it's a complete privilege and a dream to be able to do all that stuff and to be busy doing something that you love.
And that's what you want, isn't it? You want a job that you love, ultimately. Nothing worse than waking up thinking, oh, here we go again, maybe on a Monday morning, here we go with a week ahead. So, do you know, that's really, really nice to hear. And, I think that's absolutely what you want. Out of interest, Sam, what would you say is your busiest time of year for in terms of the role that you do? Because of course, many more games. You get into like the festive period, but right now with the transfer window, I wonder if it's the next kind of 2 or 3 weeks with the season starting and the transfer window still being open. Is that your busiest time or a different time in the year?
Yeah, so I think you're spot on there. It's when the two worlds collide and suddenly you're doing games, but you're also doing all the transfer stuff because one aspect of that job is hard enough or intense enough without having the other one sort of overlapping. So yeah, the next sort of couple weeks when the games are underway and the transfer window sort of coming to an end, that's going to be really, really busy. Same around the January period. Obviously, you've got very hectic sort of winter schedule, and you've got a lot of deals coming through towards that January deadline day. So yeah, when those two worlds collide, certainly it sort of starts to pick up a lot.
Interesting for us, but and I'm sure it's for you as well. But proper, working you hard for sure. But moving on to Tottenham's transfer window, then starting with what some would say is the obvious, but I think has to be discussed. 6 signings to date for Tottenham in this summer transfer window, and over 230 million spent. How would you rate Tottenham's window so far? What they've done in that period of time? I'm thinking particularly getting those 6 signings in the first kind of half and first real period of the window.
Yeah, I think they started superbly. They started with a plan. They were true to their word. You know, they obviously spoke at the end of last season about this is going to be a change for us. And, you know, they were very clear at the end. Actions speak louder than words. And ultimately, they've been true to that. And so you can only praise them for that approach. I think each signing, there's a clearly defined reason behind it. These signings have been backed by De Zerbi. He clearly has a plan for each of them, whether that's, you know, sort of adding experience in the form of Robertson or even Dubravka or Senesi, or whether it's in terms of Jean-Paul Van Hecke and the ability to pass through the lines and how sort of crucial that could be to Tottenham's build-up. You know, so I think their business at the start of the window has been superb, but it is about building on that, because I think we can all say that there are areas in attack that need work. And, you know, I think that out wide, they certainly need someone. They might need two people. And potentially, you know, they could look to restructure their striking options. I think if they can get rid of maybe Richarlison and potentially Scarlett as well and bring in another striker, then, you know, that would sort of, yeah, that would transform the team, and it would add a lot, you know, it add a lot of goals, which we were sort of sorely lacking last season.
I agree with you, it certainly would, and you know, it'd be music to Spurs fans' ears. I think if that to hear that there's a possibility, you know, of that happening. I think we want to see forward players. Probably different opinions, split opinions amongst the fan base. Who and is this good money is often a conversation, and then you have the argument. You know, is it my money? It's not my money. That, you know, all of that at the moment that seems to be ongoing. But after two consecutive 17th place finishes for Tottenham, of course, the first one important to note, winning the Europa League, so far better. Did you expect Tottenham to be aggressive in this transfer window, you know, this aggressive as they has been, and so early? Because some people go, you know, how can you afford to do that? You know, how can you do that after, you know, missing out on Europe? Whereas others go, actually, you know, you needed to act like that after two really bad seasons and got away with it last year. So I want to know how you feel about that.
Yeah, I don't think ultimately I could say that I expected it, because that would be for me to ignore the past and to ignore year after year of, you know, poor investment or lack of investment. So I certainly didn't expect it. But I do think they needed it. I don't think I'm alone in thinking that one. I think everyone knew that they needed to be aggressive, but whether they actually went out and did it, that's a completely different matter. And, you know, credit to them. They have actually gone out and shown ambition and changed the wage structure and identified targets early and been able to convince them to come. I think it's a massive credit to De Zerbi that he's been able to convince Tonali and Fernandes, two players who had, you know, they had options, that to convince them that this Tottenham side who've finished 17th in successive seasons, that's the project that they want to buy into. That shows a lot. That shows a lot about De Zerbi and his, you know, his ability to convince, but the plan that he has in place for Tottenham.
Feels like a massive character, does Roberto De Zerbi. We're going to come on to him in a bit. Sam, from what you're seeing around the club, does this genuinely feel like a change in how Tottenham operate in the transfer market? Of course, to state the obvious, a lot more money spent, acting a lot quicker, which you've spoken about. But it's still good doing this, but it's no good if we return to normality for the transfer windows to come. Of course, it's still great what we've done, take nothing away from it. But do you think this is the new normal for Tottenham, or is it just an exceptional circumstance to make up for maybe the poor or lack of transfer activity since moving to the new stadium?
Again, I think it would be hard to say one way or the other, concrete opinion, whether that will be the case. I think obviously supporters would like to hope that that definitely is the case. But one thing I can say, I guess, in support of the idea that this is the new normal is that there are new people in place. You know, the recruitment structure behind the scenes, Rafi Mawson, these people have come into the club, and it looks like we're starting to see slowly the impact that they are having and the changes that they're implementing. So in that regard, yeah, there's been a change behind the scenes, and there's therefore been a change in the approach to the transfer market, and that's been quite clear. So yeah, I would suggest that is yeah, I'd suggest that that's a, you know, a really good thing, and a sort of positive omen going forward.
That's good to hear. Sam, thank you very, very much. Of the six signings that Tottenham have made so far, which one do you think could have the biggest impact this season? Because I think it'd be fair to say that Sandro Tonali is the biggest name, your household name, but a lot of us think that Mateus Fernandes actually is maybe a high ceiling or certainly could be the most impactful this season. So, what are your thoughts in terms of the signings? Who's going to be more useful and influential?
Yeah, I think Fernandez is up there. I agree that he probably has the highest ceiling of all the players that have come in. And I think he's a good fit for De Zerbi's system in that pivot. He plays unbelievably well under pressure, and that's a massive thing for De Zerbi's midfielders. They've got to be able to play out under pressure. So yeah, Fernandez seems to suit the role really well. He's young. He's got really, really good potential. I also do think that Van Hecke's an excellent fit. He knows De Zerbi well. When De Zerbi left Brighton, he credited him with changing his life. And I think that speaks volumes to the relationship that they had, but also the impact that De Zerbi can have on developing him as a player. And as I say, he's a good fit for the system. He plays through the lines. He's comfortable in possession. He's aggressive. All of these things are characteristics that De Zerbi will like, and that there's a very good reason why he's bought in. So I think in terms of a ceiling raiser, you're looking at Fernandes. But if we're looking at the here and now and improving come the 22nd against Brentford, and then I think Van Heck is he's a nice player to sort of slot in and see perhaps an instant impact.
I actually agree with you, Sam. Thank you. And on that, you say there with Van Hecke, do you think Jan-Paul Van Hecke will be the partner of Micky van der Ven? You're thinking Brentford the first game. Do you think that's the partnership, Van der Ven and Van Hecke?
Yeah, I think it would be. They've played together at Youth International. They obviously were both together at the World Cup. Van der Ven obviously sort of playing as a makeshift left back, but the relationship is still there. So yeah, I think that's a nice and easy sort of solution that they've got there. So yeah, I can see them partnering up for sure. But yeah, I think they've also given themselves the option of having Senesi as well, which is a nice sort of alternative to be able to interchange those players, because I didn't feel that Tottenham, Frank, but also De Zerbi, they never felt particularly confident chopping and changing their centre-back options, because they didn't feel that they could trust Dragusin, for example. They didn't necessarily feel they could trust Danso that much. So it's nice to be able to have someone of Senesi's calibre to rotate in and out of the side.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm a big fan of Senesi. I think it's a great pickup as well for considering he's a free transfer. I think it's a really good player, maybe 45 million pound defender if he wasn't for free, and so a contract working in our favour in that case. We mentioned him a little bit earlier, but to focus on him because I think he deserves a lot of attention, a lot of credit, and that is Roberto De Zerbi, the man himself. How much of this transfer window is actually down to Roberto De Zerbi? I'm just thinking, describes himself as a shark in a transfer window, saying there's no option to say no. Everything points towards that. This is De Zerbi's window. It's him, and what he says goes.
Yeah, I think he's been crucial. It's been absolutely crucial, and I think we probably knew that, given the context in which he came to the club. He ultimately held all the power when it came to negotiations, and so I don't think he would have signed a long-term contract at the club without guarantees that they would be true to their word about backing him and his targets. And I think he's also been, public about that in the pre-season, saying that the identification of the targets and the negotiations that have since taken place got underway almost as soon as he was negotiating his position to be manager. So these signings have been months in the work. It all seemed a bit sudden, but the best signings don't happen without good pre-planning. And so yeah, I mean he's been influential, and you only need to look at the way Tonali spoke about the negotiations, coming to see him in Italy, and they've obviously got this bond, both sort of having a long-standing history of Brescia, and so there were a lot of conversations, very personal conversations as well. The same goes for Fernandes. I think he spoke about, De Zerbi going to speak to his family and convincing them of the fact that Tottenham was the best place for Fernandes to play going forward. So those sort of anecdotes, those instances, they really talk to the influence that De Zerbi's had in the transfer market.
Absolutely, Italian being a big kind of magnet, I think, attraction for players. On that, we speak briefly there, but I do want to know even more about how involved De Zerbi is personally in convincing players to join Spurs. The obviously examples used, Sandro Tonali and Fernandes, £185 million spent in midfield, and I'm sure that both Fernandes and Tonali, particularly with Tonali, would have had interest from other clubs. So with them and others that we've seen joining this window and make join for the rest of the window and beyond, how much of it is down to De Zerbi in terms of they're going, okay, I'm joining because of De Zerbi or because of his project, rather than joining Tottenham? Of course, as a Tottenham fan, you want them to say, this is Tottenham Hotspur, this is why we're joining. But is the biggest pull really down to the manager?
Well, I think supporters probably have to be realistic about that. Is that it's not going to be everything. Tottenham, as a club, they've got a fantastic stadium. They are now paying good wages, and they've competed in the Champions League and European competition for quite a long time consistently. So there's a track record there. But ultimately, if you are to look at history, I mean, I guess supporters have to be realistic. Only last year they won their first trophy in 17 years, so it's not joining for the glory, as it were. It's not like I guess a Chelsea or an Arsenal where they can point to all these different trophies that they've won, and that's the reason. So De Zerbi's trying to build that. He's trying to build that future and convince them of that future rather than going back into the past, I guess, and drawing on that. He's looking at the way forward and how Tottenham can be.
Okay, Sam, thank you. Really do appreciate that insight. Sticking with De Zerbi, while everything appears to be rosy now, everybody's happier than ever, I would argue. Is there any concern, just being realistic, that De Zerbi could become agitated? Like, I'm thinking even just in this window, in the next few days, if an attacker doesn't come in, because we talk about how he comes out and says, a bomber's coming. I also wonder with that, whether you think that was a genuine kind of miscommunication, lost in translation, because he come out the day after and explained how bomba it means differently in Italian and English, or do you think that was genuinely a planned or strategic move by De Zerbi to try and get the club to move quicker? And if so, is that showing that he's a little bit agitated?
I think there will be a slight frustration, I guess. I mean, we're not obviously privy to the pace at which these negotiations are going at. But I think, ultimately, De Zerbi, Tottenham would be disappointed if they ended the window and no one else came in. De Zerbi wants 2 to 3 more signings. If he doesn't get those 2 to 3 more signings, then there will definitely be some frustration there. And I think, you only have to look at his history to understand that he's a man who stands on principle, and if he's not happy with something, he'll let everyone know. So I think there is still an avenue by which he could end the window frustrated, but I don't see it trending that way. I think Tottenham will get the additions thereafter in attack. I just think these are drawn out discussions, and they're sort of dependent on a couple different things happening.
Sam, on that, just a little bit, with De Zerbi, I know that this doesn't apply to this window and this is very, very long term, and someone say, Harry, this doesn't matter now. But how long would you realistically say or see De Zerbi staying at Tottenham? Of course, track record of not sticking around very long and things maybe getting a little bit sour. I'm thinking particularly in the second full season at Brighton, Marseille, just a few problems there. He certainly says how he thinks. I think you take him at face value. Any concerns that, if De Zerbi doesn't get his way, you spoke about it a little bit there, but he could go, do you know what, this is not for me?
Yeah, I think those are very, very very real concerns, and certainly something to keep in mind and keep in the background, especially if, results don't start the way that I think supporters would hope. He's shown that he's been combustible at pretty much every club he's been at. So, that's in his DNA. But I do also think, on the other side of that is, again, he held all the keys in negotiations when he came to the club. And so there will have been some very thorough, quite intense conversations, I'd imagine, around, okay, how are you going to give me what I want, or back my vision? How can I take your word for it? Those sort of discussions along those lines. And so I think the pressure pot situation by which he actually arrived at the club probably serves to benefit him and supporters, because ultimately I don't think he would have taken the job had he not been given some very clear plans, about the direction of the club and how they were going to back him.
Absolutely. Another week or two of De Zerbi maybe not sure about joining could have really cost Tottenham and could be in the Championship. Could be talking to you right now, Tottenham being in the Championship, and it probably wouldn't be, even though he said it would be, under De Zerbi. Who knows? But that's something that we never know what could have happened. But certainly my feeling is that De Zerbi did save us. Onto the attack then, which we have briefly mentioned, but it's on the minds and lips of every Spurs fan. And it feels like the biggest question at the moment for Spurs fans. 6 signings, this is great, but still no major attacking addition. And that felt like the priority position for many fans coming into the window. So to be blunt and to be frank, why hasn't Tottenham addressed the attack yet? Is it about putting other priorities first, of Tottenham not managed to convince attackers to join, or not found their preference? What do you think it's down to?
Yeah, to me, it screams that I think their targets, I think they're just more difficult transfers to pull off. There's a couple different things that need to happen before those discussions can sort of have the green light, I guess, is the best way of putting it. I think with Gakpo, for example, he certainly seems to be a player of interest, but ultimately Liverpool want to sign a replacement. And until they sign a replacement, their stance is that they're not selling. And so you can see there that there's a roadblock in the way of that.
Is that the same for City with Savinho, that they won't let him go until they find a replacement? Because that's dragged on for over 365 days now, it seems.
Yeah. Savinho is a difficult one, where it's quite clear that he wants to leave and he's expressed a desire to leave. You've then had the change of manager, and ultimately Maresca's got to assess whether he wants Savinho. His opinion is obviously going to be maybe slightly different to that of Guardiola's. So he's got to come in, see the player, assess the player. And then, I think it is sort of a case again in terms of replacements where I think until some noise starts building around Man City potentially having a replacement, I can see, City sources have denied that they're in for Pedro Neto, but I would keep an eye on that one. I do think that one will move, because Maresca really likes Neto. So that there you go. You have Neto, who would be lined up to replace Savinho, and which deal goes first in this sort of, I guess, like a tier list, as it were.
It feels like a domino effect. You'll know more than me, but looking at it from an outsider, that just once one goes, we're going to see movements everywhere.
Exactly, and that happens all the time, every transfer window. It happened last summer there are a bunch of wingers were on the move last summer, and all of those, again, it was a domino effect. Once the first one moves, then they set the price for the rest of the market, and from there you see a lot of deals getting finalised. So I think Savinho will happen. I just think he wants to come to Tottenham. He certainly wants to leave City. And I don't think that Man City are particularly fussed about keeping him. So that one I can see happening, but I can also see it maybe dragging on until even closer towards the end of the window. And then with Gakpo, I think that's a difficult one. Liverpool simply have to find a replacement before they will before they will sanction his departure. And once that happens, then I think they would be open to it. But until that happens, I don't think anything changes there.
On Liverpool finding a Gakpo replacement, realistically, who's it more likely to be? Of course, Barcola's a name that's floated about amongst the Liverpools and Arsenals. Is that realistic as an option to replace Gakpo, or do you not think it'd be someone of maybe the size and potential of Barcola?
I think Barcola is a very, very realistic option for Liverpool. I think that's a deal that I can see happening. Absolutely. I think the interest is definitely there from Liverpool. I think talks are definitely underway. That's certainly accurate. And it's also accurate that Barcola wants to leave, and that's quite publicly known. So all of those things sort of trend towards the idea that that Barcola will be a Liverpool player. And so if he arrives, it's big money. It's a complicated move, as all sort of big transfers are. There's a lot of stuff involved, a lot of finances, a lot of people. But if that gets solved, then maybe they will become more open to letting Gakpo leave.
So I appreciate that. Thank you for the insight on that. Are Spurs definitely prioritising signing at least one attacker before the end of the window? Is their priority definitely that, rather than let's sign a number 10, or maybe even, to surprise some people, looking at a goalkeeper? We'll get onto it a little bit, but with the departure expected of Djed Spence, I just wonder if a fullback all of a sudden takes priority, because all of us, I think, or majority, I don't want to speak for everybody, wants it to be the attack. Again, different opinions on, is it striker, right wing, left wing, if we had to choose one. But is Tottenham's priority definitely the attack now?
Yeah, I think De Zerbi has publicly sort of come out and said that in no uncertain terms, is that the attack is the priority. And I don't think he would have used the term bomber if he didn't mean an exciting attacking player. I'm not sure you're allowed to use that term if you're describing a backup right back or a goalkeeper, for example. In terms of the goalkeeping situation, I'm not necessarily sure that changes. I was of the opinion that when James Trafford was on the market, that they could potentially look at that, because that's a long-standing target, or he was a long-standing target, I should say. But ultimately, he's gone to Leeds. And so they've put all their trust in Kinski, new contract. De Zerbi really likes him. And so I think they start with him as the number one, and they sort of see how it goes from there, and maybe they reassess that in January if it doesn't quite work out. In terms of a backup right back, again, he really likes Gray there, and maybe supporters don't really want to see Gray play there, but he's performed admirably. And if it is just as a backup right back, behind the sort of ever dependable Pedro Porro, who never seems to miss a game, then ultimately, you're probably quite happy just having Gray there to play potentially up to sort of 6 or 7 games to cover Porro. So I don't think there'll be any movement on the goalkeeper front. I think they could potentially look at a backup right back, but I think that would be more of a sort of market opportunity than anything else. I don't think there's necessarily a key target in mind.
Okay, that's fair enough. Sam, I appreciate the clarification on that. Before we move on to outgoings, potential outgoings and confirmed outgoings, and new contracts actually as well. Lastly, on the attack, could the lack of attacking signings ultimately for you be the difference between, decent season under De Zerbi, top half, much better than last year, compared to a really successful one back in Europe, and in De Zerbi's own words, top 4 and maybe a title charge?
Yeah, I do think it could be. I think it's fair to say that at this stage, if the transfer window was to close right now, I probably couldn't give it much above maybe a 6. In terms of the areas that have been addressed. Ultimately, the business that they've done has been superb, but they have to go and finish it. They have to. This was a whole squad overhaul they were talking about, and the attack was a very glaring area that was in need of sort of change. And so, I think, 1, I think they will get the additions that they need in attack, but 2, I think the expectations do change if they don't manage to get those deals over the line.
Sam, thank you very, very much. Fingers crossed that Tottenham managed to do so. On Cristian Romero, then, I mean, you may be sick of hearing about his name throughout this transfer window. That's something that hasn't gone away. I mean, some Spurs fans will be. He now looks increasingly likely to leave. That's hardly surprising, but it looks like Atletico. But if it's not, would the club ever consider selling Romero to Arsenal if the price was right? Or do you just think with this, with Romero to Arsenal, the price is irrelevant because Arsenal are involved?
I do think it's irrelevant. I think as much as Tottenham's back room have made some interesting calls, let's put it that way, over the years, and perhaps some that would be considered a little bit tone deaf. I don't think they'd be daft enough to do something like
Even
that.
double if Arsenal somehow offer double than Atletico?
I genuinely like. I don't think Romero would say no.
That's interesting. See, that's what
Yeah,
we don't like. That's the problem.
yeah,
Romero
yeah.
wouldn't say no to that.
Yeah, I don't. I'm not sure he'd say no, but I do think the club, they're smart enough to know what that sort of deal would mean for supporter board relations, which are only just sort of slowly starting to mend. So, yeah, I can't see that one happening at all. I think that was that was something that was just put out into the market to put some feelers out and to test the waters, I guess.
That doesn't surprise me. But if a shock happens, Sam, for you and for all of us, I would argue, if Arsenal genuinely are serious and they come out of nowhere and go, right, I don't think it will happen for a minute, but hypothetical, 70, 75 million, like, could the club be put in an uncomfortable position where they go, okay, here's 70 plus for Romero, or Atletico are kind of offering 30, 35? I think we know that they will probably still say no to Arsenal, but does it get a tiny bit uncomfortable if Arsenal are serious and finding a Saliba, like I say, replacement because he's injured at the moment?
Yeah, I guess it would put them in a comfortable spot. I just think that Arsenal, I don't think they would offer that money. I think basically my opinion on this changes were Arsenal to offer silly money, as it were. 70 to 80 is ridiculous money for a player of Romero's caliber. Is crazy money, and I don't think I'd begrudge the club for taking it. And I'm not sure supporters. I really don't think supporters would. I mean, I don't speak for the supporters, but I just think that there would be there would be a realism to it. That ultimately, this is a guy at 28 who's shown himself capable of playing at these world-class levels, but nowhere near consistently enough to be considered a world-class player. So to get 70 to 80 million for him would just be, it'd be ridiculous. It's unthinkable, and I just frankly don't think Arsenal would offer that. I think that would be crazy money to be spending on someone of Romero's quality.
I don't think they will either, but if they do, that'll be certainly interesting to watch. I'm sure for you to report on and to cover and to keep an eye on. But sticking with Romero for just a second, Sam, do you have any insight at all into if Tottenham maybe regret even just a little bit making Cristian Romero club captain? Do they regret that? I mean, thinking even just maybe a little bit. And for them, also, I've heard reports that Romero has been a bit of a troublemaker, particularly after the January window. He's caused a few problems. Is there any truth to that?
Yeah, I think they probably would regret it, only in the sense that they offered him, they offered and he signed a new contract last summer. So, those will be on improved terms, and also that would have been on the understanding that this is a player that we're going to keep for several years at least. And so to then sort of see him leave for, I guess you'd call 30 to 40 mil cut price fee. That would certainly be a disappointment for them. But ultimately, this is a Tottenham squad that think of Romero's leadership as you will, but ultimately he was the best candidate. It's a squad devoid of leaders, or certainly was before they embarked on bringing in Robertson and Senesi and Dubravka and people and trying to address that issue. But certainly last season it was a massive problem. And, as much as Romero rightly came in for a lot of criticism about the way he handled having the captaincy, his social media outbursts, his the sendings off against Liverpool and Man United and all of those things, all of those issues, he still was the best candidate to be captain. And I think it kind of showed that whilst Van de Ven really picked up under De Zerbi and, got back to close to the level that he's shown as a leader, he also let the side down. That performance against Crystal Palace is not one that I've quickly forgotten.
And blanking Thomas Frank, I mean, whatever you thought of him, that doesn't go down well, does it, usually, from looking at it outside in?
Yeah, he's a young guy. He's only just turned 25. He's in the leadership group, but he was only promoted to the leadership group within October, in October last year. And so to then be given the captaincy in the absence of Romero is quite a big step up. And I think Frank was, when he was asked about Van de Ven's leadership qualities, he always erred on the side of caution. He didn't go too big or too strong on the idea that Van de Ven was this, domineering character, or certainly had the temperament to be a leader quite yet. I think that was a role that he felt he could develop into, but that's something that takes time. It takes experience. It takes years sort of playing and being that leader within a team, which Van de Ven just, doesn't have.
Absolutely. I really appreciate that, Sam. Before we move on to Solomon, on Romero, I totally agree with you that 70, particularly if you get closer to 80 million, would be unrealistic and silly money, in your own words. I totally agree with that. But for 35 million, it looks like roughly that he could go to, or will go to, Atletico Madrid. Is that a bargain, do you think, even just a small one, as far as Atletico are concerned? I'm just thinking an inflated market. We'll get onto it a bit with Spence, but I feel it's similar there in terms of Tottenham have done very well from a business and outgoings kind of selling point of view, very, very well, getting much more than I thought we certainly would. And a lot of us, I think, feel the same. But Romero, do you feel that maybe if he left on better terms, that it could be a bit more? And also, just lastly, do you think that because a lot of clubs and everybody pretty much knows that Tottenham are keen to get rid of Romero, is that why maybe the offers are so low, because they know that Tottenham will likely accept them?
I think it's a deal that works for both parties, and I think that's the same for Romero as it is Spence, in the sense that these are, De Zerbi has said that he's not going to stand in the way of players if they want to leave, and ultimately they can only sell at the price that interested parties are willing to pay. And I think with Romero and Spence, there's interest, but there's not a groundswell of interest in either of them. And so therefore, there's not this crazy bidding war that, Spurs would love to have, but that's just not the situation as it is. So to get, 35 to 40, it's probably slightly below their market value. But if it means that they can get a deal done fairly quickly, and certainly before the season starts, then it's still, a deal that works for them, and allows De Zerbi to have that clarity of mind about who is here and who isn't, and who wants to play for him and who is perhaps looking elsewhere.
That's what you want as a manager, and he's set his boundaries. He's been crystal clear. I'd argue that he's refreshing and he's very clear, very honest, passion clearly coming through. No nonsense with De Zerbi. Briefly on Solomon, was he always going to leave this window? And any surprise that the fee is only a single digit, reported around 5 million after playing the second most amount of minutes for Tottenham in the pre-season tour?
I think the expectation was always that he was going to leave. Obviously, he's only made a handful of sort of senior appearances since he arrived at Spurs, and so I think his permanent exit was always inevitable. I think the fee involved it's fair. I think it's fair. I don't. It's obviously not groundbreaking, and maybe they could have squeezed a little bit more. But if it means that they're getting him off the books, getting the money sort of banked, as it were, and not letting these negotiations drag on when they've got other priorities, then that's sort of like, that's good business, I think. And ultimately, this is a player that they bought in, on a free transfer. So
it's a profit,
right. So to bring 7 mil and have him play, I think it's like 6 senior games, but obviously some successful loan spells elsewhere. That's good business from Tottenham.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with you. And it's a profit either way, as a lot of people will say. Maybe we'd hope for, let's say, 10 million with add-ons, but less than that. But it's still a profit either way. Therefore,
Mhm.
from a business perspective, that's still very good. On Van der Ven, we touched on him there, so perfect segue just before that. So he signed a new 5-year deal at Tottenham with an option to extend. That's what's been reported. I'm wondering how important it was for the club to commit Micky van der Ven down. And we spoke last season about potential leadership problems. Was there any genuine fear within the club that van der Ven could leave this summer? If maybe I'm thinking before De Zerbi come in.
Yeah, I think there was definitely rumblings that he would leave, and I think there was probably a moment last season where his departure was almost as inevitable as Romero's, and I think Tottenham, they probably wouldn't have been planning for it, but they probably would have sort of had a think that, okay, we could head into next season without either of them. I think that was quite a real possibility at one point. Ultimately, Van der Ven, unlike Romero, obviously Romero was out injured during De Zerbi's time in charge, had time under him, had time under De Zerbi, was given the trust, and ultimately De Zerbi's done a very good job in convincing him that he is the future of this defence, and ultimately his future lies at Tottenham. And so, yeah, I think once De Zerbi came to the club, I think it slowly but surely those rumours began to disappear, and with good reason, basically. The idea being that Van der Ven was warming to the idea of actually staying at Spurs. So yeah, I think all credit again goes to De Zerbi in that regard. I think he's been able to convince him that he's the centre of this project that he has in mind for Tottenham.
Sam, thank you. It's interesting you say that as well. In terms of departure, at one point was kind of seen on par with Romero, and if you think about it, that's what a lot of Spurs fans are saying. If we lost one and kept one, who would it be? That was a genuine conversation. It feels strange now because even before Van der Ven fully committed, it always felt like he was going to stay. Ever since De Zerbi walked through that door, and Romero the opposite. But I do kind of look at Romero and go, well, could it have been a match made in heaven with De Zerbi? But as you said, Sam, it probably is in the best benefit and interest of everybody to move on. In terms of captaincy and leadership group, should Spurs fans expect both announcements, particularly captaincy, soon before the season starts? And what should Spurs fans expect in terms of who's in that leadership group and who will be club captain?
Yeah, so I think they should definitely expect it before the season starts. I'd be incredibly surprised if they hadn't named the club captain before they kick off against Brentford. So yeah, a decision on that should be imminent. In terms of the candidates, I think they sort of speak for themselves. I think there's only a few sort of key players that would be in contention. So one of those obviously being Van der Ven. I think he's obviously going to hopefully play an awful lot of minutes next season. He's at the heart of the defence. De Zerbi has typically decided to pick a centre-back as his captain. He did so at Napoli and Marseille. So he's a standout candidate for sure. And then James Maddison is another one. I think the issue around Maddison is obviously his fitness. If he's not playing an awful lot, and they need to be careful with him. So I'm not suggesting that they should rush him into the team because they want to make him captain. I think the decision should be the other way around. Is we're looking at him and we're thinking he's not going to play a great deal of minutes at the start of the season. Are we prepared for our captain to sort of perhaps be sitting on the bench or sitting outside of a match day squad? So yeah, I think his capabilities as a character is obviously very well liked, very well respected. I think he has all the makings of a captain. I just think, can they trust his fitness? Do they think he's reliable enough, durable enough to be a captain on the pitch? Because I think it is important that whilst it's not a be all and end all, your captain should be one of your most sort of dependable players. They should be playing.
Was there any chance of two separate roles, Sam, then maybe a club captain and on the pitch captain? Because you're right, I agree. Maddison feels like the all-round fit, very good at talking to the media. I'm sure you can echo that. He seems wanting to do that, very natural speaker, and there's a lot of good things on and off the pitch. But I just wonder if De Zerbi goes, do you know what, Van der Ven on the pitch, Maddison off the pitch.
Yeah, well, that would be a very normal conversation. I think those things, those wouldn't necessarily be clearly defined roles. I think those things will happen regardless. So I think, regardless of who gets the captaincy, say it's Van der Ven, I think Maddison will still take up a leadership role within this squad. And so, that's obviously the benefit and the reason why they have a leadership group is that, gone are the days where it's a captain and he's out on his own leading the group. You need to have sort of 4 to 5 trusted individuals who can all add something that's slightly different in terms of their leadership. So, yeah, I think that's a very fluid conversation. And as I say, regardless of who gets the captaincy, I think the other candidates within that will also step up in their own way over the course of the season.
Before we progress on Van der Ven and the new shiny 5-year deal that he signed, option to extend, come in, one of the highest paid players, far more than Conor Gallagher, who broke the wage structure in the first place in January. From percentage wise, like 0 to 100, what's the probability that Micky van der Ven's contract in there is something about a role within the leadership team or him being captain? I'm just wondering if he maybe asked for that or the club spoke to him about that before signing the deal, because I just wonder if it's included at all within it.
Potentially it would be, but I'm not sure the club would be comfortable offering guarantees to a player over the captaincy, in the sense that would, to me, suggest that a player is angling for the captaincy rather than being the right fit for the captaincy. I don't think that decision can come from the player. I don't think Maddison can turn around and say, I want guarantees that I will be the captain. I think that decision has to lie with De Zerbi. And so perhaps there's sort of, that decision had already been made, and maybe there's a financial incentive to him being captain, but I don't think the decision to make him captain is one that will have dictated whether or not he was going to sign a contract.
It's quite a low % chance.
Yeah, I think so. Because I just think that kind of defeats the purpose of having the captain there in the first place. Is that it's not the captain is. It has to be really a selfless position. It's you're looking after other people, and so by coming to De Zerbi or whoever the decision makers and saying I want to be captain, that sort of speaks a little bit, in my mind, to someone's personality, and that perhaps doesn't make them the right fit to be captain.
I suppose if it's in the contract as well, again, you respect that you know far more than me on it, but I understand if it's in his contract, then if he does anything wrong or anything changes, manager changes, that it'd be very hard to remove him as club captain until the end of his contract, which could be, if the extension, 6 years. So it could be stuck.
Yeah. I think obviously, perhaps this decision again has been made prior to him signing the contract. I wouldn't be surprised about that at all. And so in that regard, there's potentially, again, financial incentives or certain things written into his contract about being the captain. But yeah, as I say, I don't think the decision to make him captain, if they do, would have dictated whether or not he was sort of going to sign a contract.
Sam, thank you very, very much. We touched on him, but to zoom in very briefly on Djed Spence, because he looks the next one to leave, really, it's set to be that way anyway. It's Inter Milan. Here we go from the likes of Fabrizio Romano. So I'm just wondering for you, that this departure between De Zerbi and Spence, do you think that it's purely down to the move just suits both better, or do you think it's De Zerbi going, I actually don't like Spence too much? That's what it felt like amongst fans going into the World Cup. Or do you think Spence goes, do you know what, I don't really want to be here, maybe the manager's not going to play me at left back, or is it going to give me the minutes over a Porro, over a Doggy? What do you think it's down to? Because it feels like it's kind of not come out of nowhere, but it kind of escalate very quickly to he could leave to right, boom, now gone to Inter Milan.
I think De Zerbi likes Spence. I think he likes his character, and I think he really needed that in the running. But ultimately, I just think that it was an inevitable situation being that Spence wants to play, he wants to be first choice, he wants to play right back, and ultimately De Zerbi just cannot guarantee him the minutes that he wants. And so I think same with Romero. It's best for both parties. De Zerbi's not going to stand in the way of players who want to leave, and so whereas we've seen a sort of softening of relations with Bergvall, and he seems to have actually maybe warmed to the idea of remolding himself and becoming the player that De Zerbi wants to compete for minutes. I think Spence was quite sort of clear, quite adamant that he's approaching the peak age of his career. He wants to be first choice somewhere, and he wants to play in his preferred position at right back. And ultimately, he's not going to get that at Tottenham, where Pedro Porro, one, he's ever dependable, and two, he's just signed a new long-term contract. So, yeah, I think it's just that would have been a very simple, grown-up conversation. No sort of bad blood involved. I just think it's, De Zerbi will appreciate the fact that you only get one career, and Spence, of course, he wants to play minutes, and he wants to make a legacy for himself, and he can only do that by being the first choice somewhere.
So I appreciate that answer on Spence. And you mentioned Bergvall there. Would you say it's now more likely that he stays at Tottenham this window rather than goes elsewhere, rather than being sold or even be loaned out? Is he expected now to stay at Tottenham? Time's running out.
I'm not sure the expectation would be that he is staying at Tottenham, but as you say, time is running out, and we've not seen a ton of movement on the interest that was there originally. So obviously Nottingham Forest and then Newcastle as well are two clubs who definitely have interest in him, but they don't. Yeah, they're not going to make a big play for him. Then there's really not much he can do, and so he's probably looked at that and realised that. I think, I think maybe at the start of the window he was quite confident that he would get a move. And he wanted to play in this role that didn't exist within De Zerbi's setup, and that was that. Now the window's progressed, that interest has not progressed quite as he would have liked, and so I think he's just got to be honest with himself. He's still young. He can still work at becoming a better player, becoming a player that De Zerbi wants and trusts. And so, yeah, I think he's just been sort of realistic about his situation and the interest or lack thereof in signing him before the deadline.
Sam, thank you. I thought we'd see a bidding war maybe between Forest and Newcastle. Reports that Forest are pulling out because Newcastle went after Højbjerg again, according to reports. So maybe that's something that won't happen now. Just a few questions before we wrap up, Sam. How much credit should Johan Lange, and Vinay in particular, but also the entire Tottenham recruitment team, how much credit should they get for getting that business done so early that we spoke about earlier?
Yeah, I think they should get an awful lot of credit, and they took an awful lot of sticks, so they should get an awful lot of credit in terms. I think we've always got to be fair in our assessments of these things, and they made an excellent start. And they, as I've previously explained, they've brought in players with a plan, and they brought them in quickly, and that's all you ever want as a club, and certainly as supporters as well. But there's still work to be done, and so it would be wrong of me to make a straight judgment right now without them having made the necessary adjustments in attack, as I think we can all sort of agree that they need to make.
It seems good signs, though, both on the money spent, the type of players signed, and the wage structure. So do you think that Tottenham are moving in that right direction? And you say there, going back to what you said earlier, in terms of new faces, do you think genuinely that the Tottenham of the past, it may be dying out, the very kind of rigid wage system, we won't kind of compete for these top players? Do you think that is dying out?
Yeah, I think there's been an acknowledgement that things that they did in the past have not worked. I think that can sort of be evidenced by the fact that they've been very adamant that player sales, they have not previously maximized player sales. They got a very nice deal with Gareth Bale, but ultimately that's a world-class player going to a world-class team, and so he was always going to command a big fee. But since those since those days, they've really struggled to maximize the potential value of players, and that's something that they've worked on this summer. And that's why we're seeing Lancashire leave, and we're seeing Alfie Devine leave, and we're seeing Tottenham command fees for Luka Vuskovic, even though he's not played a senior minute. So that all points to the idea that they've identified issues, they're looking to solve them, and they're actually putting into action the solutions that they need to. And so, if you were to take that and then put it against the way they've approached signing players, it's exactly the same model. So yeah, they've sort of learned lessons from the past, and they've shown a willingness to put into action those solutions. So yeah, they can only take great credit for that.
Agree with that, yeah, absolutely. And I, along with others, have criticised him in the past. So, it's one of those you go, do you know what? Generally, really good start. But again, only good if this maintains across the further transfer windows, and even doing more before the window closes. Sam, with so many additions, 6 this window, more expected for deadline day, and potential departures, is managing the size of this Tottenham squad almost as important as bringing players in? And I wonder, also how much foreign quota and all the regulations and rules there, homegrown issues, how much of an issue is that to Tottenham? Because if you look at it kind of via the charts at the moment, it does appear that Tottenham still do need to move on quite a few players.
Yeah, I think outgoings, as I've sort of pointed to, they're very much being proactive about outgoings and ensuring that these players that they've sort of come to an assessment might not get the minutes they want, or want to leave, or they just don't feel maybe from the club's academy are good enough to make that step up to the first team. Well, let's at least make some money out of these guys, because we haven't previously. And so yeah, they've taken a very proactive stance to outgoings, and that will be something that they're certainly considering for sure. Is the squad size, the quotas, and making sure that all of that sort of stuff's in line.
Okay, Sam, thank you very much. Before we end with one or two end of season Tottenham questions, who do you expect to leave for Tottenham before the end of the window?
I think Pat Matar is someone who could potentially be on the move. I think, De Zerbi has said that he sees him as part of the squad, and I don't think he'd have any issue with keeping him around. But I just think it's the idea that De Zerbi can't guarantee him the minutes he wants. There's interest there from Aston Villa, and it's something that I could potentially see accelerating. And yeah, I think Tottenham would be happy enough to sort of negotiate that exit. So yeah, he's certainly one that I see moving on. Romero's inevitable. I think that gets done very quickly. Spence again, also inevitable. But outside of that, I'm not too sure there's too many others that could leave. Potentially Richarlison. I think maybe, again, if they want to remodel.
Is he more, sorry to interrupt, is he more likely, Richarlison, to leave than Solanke?
I think so. Just because this is nothing more than an opinion. This is my opinion, but I think there's the idea that Brazilian players tend to want to return to Brazil at some point. And I think, yeah, there's an idea that he does. I guess he doesn't owe as much to Tottenham. I don't think. I think Solanke, it feels to me as though he wants to stay. He would want to stay and sort of prove himself after a difficult last season. And so yeah, I think to my mind, Richarlison is more likely to leave. Also because of interest. He has interest, whereas it doesn't appear that Solanke has too much.
Okay, Sam, thank you very, very much. And my two final questions for you then, and some will say the big questions. If the transfer window closed tomorrow, no more incomings or outgoings, let's say Djed Spence does go through, but maybe not Romero and not others, what would you rate it out of 10 for Tottenham, 10 being the highest and 0 being the lowest? And where do you think Tottenham will finish in the league?
So with that first one, is that if they don't sign any attackers? If we were to close the window now, did you say?
Yes, do that if we don't sign any attackers.
Okay. I mean, I said 6, but I could potentially stretch to 7. I mean, I do like the additions they've made, so maybe a 7's a bit more fair.
And if
I like
Savinho and
the
Gakpo come in, let's say, does that go up quite a
okay,
bit higher than 7th or just a little bit?
a little bit in terms of meat in the room. I don't necessarily think that Gakpo and Savinho are like ceiling raisers. I think they're good players. So I'd probably push that towards an 8 in terms of them addressing all the problem areas and bringing in suitable sort of Premier League experience. Yeah, and I think if all of that happens, then a top 6 push is very much on the cards. The way the traditional top 6 clubs are all sort of shaping up, there's plenty of uncertainty around all of them. So, I think it's a little bit of an opportunity for Tottenham if they want to take it in terms of pushing back into Europe almost automatically. They don't even necessarily need this like season of rebuilding where they look towards the top half and call that progress. That I think the opportunity is there for them to just skip that step and make that push for Europe. But they have to make the additions first.
Okay, Sam, thank you so much. That is all my questions. It's a real pleasure to have you on Scarfey Spurs. So apologies if there are any tough questions, but I thought you were brilliant. It's been amazing to talk to you. For people that don't know, where can they follow you on social media or find some of your fantastic work for the Standard?
Yeah, no problem. Thanks for having me on, first of all. But you can find me on Twitter. That's where all of my sort of Tottenham news goes. So that's Tabuteau S at Tabuteau S. So that's TABUTEAUS. And yeah, as I say, there'll be plenty of Tottenham stuff, I'm sure, before the end of the transfer window.
I'm sure never quite day. You'll know better than I do. At Tottenham, certainly never is here with the channel stuff to talk about. Sam, thank you. Real pleasure to have Sam Tabuteau on Scarfey Spurs Talk, and thank you to everyone. I hope you enjoyed this interview. Thank you very much. Let us know what you thought of it. If you're listening on audio platforms, drop us a follow and a 5-star review. If you're new, if you're also new to YouTube, drop a subscribe button. But Scarfey Spurs Talk can be found across all the social media. Make sure to support Sam Tabuteau and check out some of his amazing work for the Standard. But thank you very much. And for now, come on, you Spurs.